Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Better Late Than Never, a series where I play old games that I never got around to playing and talk about what we can learn from them today. Now, we've been talking a lot about RPGs through this series, and that's kind of been by accident, so I wanted to take things in a pretty different direction for these next couple of episodes. Because while we've covered kind of a lot of different game systems throughout this series, there's one we haven't mentioned at all, and that's the Sega Genesis. So today, we're looking at Earthworm Jim. Now, I was a Genesis kid growing up, but was too young to know what games were really good for the system, hence never playing this one. So, how did this trip down memory lane go? Here are my three biggest takeaways from Earthworm Jim. Number one, no one has filled the Sega-sized hole in my heart. Like I said, I was the Sega kid growing up. I was raised on the original Sonic games, and like a lot of gamers, I was pretty bummed when Sega bowed out of the console race. Now, Earthworm Jim reminded me of why that was such a bummer to me. Because in the 90s, Sega games were so unique and special to me. Now, if you're familiar with Sega's history, and if you're not, I recommend reading Console Wars, you'll know that their strategy for taking on Nintendo back in the day was to create this edgier brand. While Mario was a family-friendly property, Sonic was full of attitude, almost standing as this weird figurehead of gaming counterculture. The aesthetic was purely 90s in every way, and within seconds of starting up Earthworm Jim, I was transported back to that time. The game's aesthetic is so unique, bringing that era of weird, gross-out humor to life with vibrant color and design. And that made me think, has anyone pulled this style off as well since Sega's heyday? I mean, sure, part of that is because the style is so strictly 90s, but even today, Earthworm Jim stands out, feeling a cut above so many character-driven platformers stylistically. You know, and while I'm on that subject, let me also say that. Number two, clever character design is a lost art. Okay, as some of you may have noticed, it's an especially good time for revivals right now. Sonic Mania was a successful return to form for Sonic, and we've still got that ToeJam and Earl game on the horizon. And considering that, we must have an Earthworm Jim revival coming, right? I mean, the character's just too good to leave out in the cold. What I really love about this era of game design is how designers really took time to figure out what specific actions their characters should have. Now, as a prime example, many of Sonic's abilities revolve around him curling into a ball because, hey, that's what hedgehogs do, right? That's a thing, right? That clever design work is on full display here. Jim gets to use his wormy head in a variety of different ways, like whipping it at enemies or using it to cling onto hooks. And now look, I'm not saying that no one designs characters like this anymore. Snake Pass is an excellent modern example of this philosophy, as well as Splatoon. But I feel like this approach to characters isn't nearly as prominent today as it used to be. When I played Psychonauts, I remember thinking that it felt like the last hurrah for that design style. And in some ways, I can understand why. It's easy to fall into gimmicky territory when creating a game built around an animal. Again, Snake Pass is a great example of this. But there's such a simple pleasure in taking control of a new character for the first time and getting to understand how their unique features get used. But with that, and as always, let's get a little critical here, because number three, these just aren't really great games. And this one really does sting for me. I recently talked to a friend about Sonic, and they noted how poorly those games played today. And I, for one, disagree when it comes to that franchise, but I've heard those thoughts echoed as a lot of the backlash for Sonic Mania. And with Earthworm Jim, I'm starting to come to terms with that. So many of Nintendo's early games are timeless thanks to really sharp, simple design choices. But Sega went a different route with the Genesis, focusing on visually impressive and fast-paced games that would make Mario look like child's play. And in the 90s, it was really impressive. But today, that added complexity is kind of showing why Sega didn't last in the console wars and why Nintendo did. These games are kind of a pain in the ass to play. I mean, they're stylistically stellar, mind you, but they can also feel just plain clunky and obtuse at times. And I'm not just talking about Earthworm Jim here. I had similar complaints when I recently played ToeJam and Earl for the first time. While I can almost always pick up an old Nintendo game and know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing in seconds, I had no idea what was happening in that game. I think Sega might have just been ahead of their time in this period. Their games were kind of too interesting for the limited technology it was running on. I mean, trying to use Jim's head as this whip weapon feels straight up unwieldy with a D-pad. After playing this, I'm still convinced that Sega was a great company, but man, I wish they had come along farther along and had a chance to bring their franchises to life for the first time today. Now, I want to look at another Genesis game in the next episode, but where should we go after that? Take a look at the list of games in the description of this video and let me know in the comments. And thanks to Andrew for recommending this one. Good call. Now, I hope I haven't crapped all over your nostalgia too much. Again, see you next time.